Bats have left the bell tower, and the victims have been plagued. Bela Lugosi is dead.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Feminerd Files, and we are bringing to you a new podcast called Unlike Any Known Color. This is a podcast where Esty is mostly going to talk about horror films, and I'm guest spotting here right now today because I don't generally like horror films, but I watched a couple so that Esty and I could talk about them. Esty, why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about why you wanted to do this podcast, and tell us about the title that you chose for this podcast.
Well, thank you, Becca, and thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Unlike Any Known Colors, it's very difficult to find people to watch horror with. We can debate a little bit how horrible these things are going forward. But yeah, just a longtime lover of horror films, and as a woman, not so easy to find a community to have a discourse with. So this is very exciting for me. The name of this podcast comes from one of my favorite H.P. Lovecraft stories called The Color Out of Space. It's actually going to be made into a movie produced by Spectre Vision starring Nick Cage maybe in the next couple of years. So Mandy, you know why that's very, very exciting. But generally the idea from that story is that a meteor crashes into this landscape and it starts to warp and change and mutate and destroy the area around it. A bunch of scientists get together to try to discover what it is, to analyze it, to see what it's made of, and when they put it under a type of spectrum graph, it produces a color unlike any known color. And that line, when I read that, I think it was in high school, I mean, it still to this day makes me a little bit crazy, because can you imagine a color unlike any known color? How does that make sense? So that's the name of this podcast that I came up with.
I think that's great, and I think will give us a good sense of what we, or you, or us, want to talk about as far as how horror gives us a very unique way of looking at certain circumstances and how people react to certain situations. So today we are going to talk about two different shows. One, the film Velvet Buzzsaw, and then the television show on Netflix. They're both on Netflix, right?
Yes.
Russian Doll. And I will say there will be spoilers. We'll be talking about the whole thing, so you have been warned.
Yeah, you can't really not. I mean, I am not necessarily spoiler averse. I'm the type of person that I'll go on Wikipedia and I will read the end and I'll hear all the twists. And for me, it heightens my anticipation, my dread, my fear is more keyed up.
Because you're like, I know this is going to happen, but I don't know when.
Exactly. And it's the classic idea that the monster you don't see is always the most frightening. Like, for example, I heard about this horrible movie called Human Centipede, and I was really intrigued, so I went and read the Wikipedia, and it made me so sick to read this, and I was imagining what it looked like. And then when I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's gross. But I wasn't really as grossed out as when I just read it and sat with it in my dorm room in Newark, New Jersey. As you can imagine, that's very terrifying, very terrifying.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't like gore, and so that's why I usually don't watch horror films. But I know there's a lot out there that rely on things other than gore. I would say both Russian Doll and Velvet Buzzsaw fall into that category. So I will sometimes look ahead of time and see if there are things that are going to be gory, because then I know I can close my eyes. But that's very interesting that you kind of have the whole story already mapped out ahead of time. I think, too, this idea that the human imagination conjures up things that are so much worse than they are in reality. It's like when you're going to go talk to a cute person and you're like, how is this going to go? It's going to go horribly. And then you do it and it's not actually that terrible. So I think in some ways horror films can give you a sense of that if they say, okay, this is going to happen, but we're not actually going to show you, and then you get to come up with that, and it's so much worse in your head.
Absolutely. That's the most... I like things that make... we'll put it this way. I don't like to feel good. Now, make of that what you will. But I don't the feelings of disquiet and dread, not necessarily disgust, those are the things that really, I don't know, keep my internal motors running. I'll speak to this a little bit, that professionally in my life, I am a criminologist and I study political violence, most specifically terrorism. And so I look at really awful things that people do and the impacts that it has. And then to unwind, I go read and watch movies and all that stuff about really awful things that people have done. And I always wonder what that means about me. But yeah, so I love that stuff. The gross stuff, I find, I don't like to use the word boring, but it is kind of boring. So I'm with you on gore. Not just because it bothers me, because it's dull.
Mm. It's like a cheap trick sometimes.
Yes, I just saw one called Ritual of Death. It was this Brazilian movie that was made. I mean, it actually had a good plot, but it was just mostly disgusting, and it's not very scary.
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about Velvet Buzzsaw. I enjoyed it for the most part. It wasn't necessarily my favorite film that I'd ever seen. I really liked the intro, like the title sequence with the drawings and stuff and whatever song was played during that intro. I really enjoyed that, and it kind of gave me this sense of what the movie might be about. But in general, I thought that the film, great acting, great design. I liked a lot of the angles and the kind of cinematography, but I felt like it didn't quite know what it was trying to say, and the beats of the film didn't quite work for me. Like the way that the suspense was built felt very up and down, and so I never really felt that invested.
I don't. Well, there's not any character really that's sympathetic enough for you to care whether or not something happens to them. I liked it. Most movies. Another thing I'll say, I'm a huge fan of MST3K, and in my opinion, any type of art is a minor miracle. So even though I might not like something, I'm never going to be one to crap on the people that made it.
Sure.
I didn't really care for it as a horror movie. I don't think it was too twee to be a horror movie.
What does that mean?
It is a little too precious.
Oh, okay.
And as someone that watches a lot of it, I've seen all that stuff before.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing really revelatory about it. I was really excited for it because this was a pairing of the director Dan Gilroy and Jake Gyllenhaal. Gyllenhaal?
I think it's Gyllenhaal.
My apologies, Jake, if you ever hear this. Because they had done, in 2014, they paired up to do Nightcrawler,
right.
which was fantastic. And that's actually the first time I actually saw Riz Ahmed in
Yeah.
anything, and so good.
He's great.
So it was I really love that. Nightcrawler actually won the best feature debut for Dan Gilroy at the Independent Spirit Awards. So, and I remember hearing a lot of scuttlebutt about how great that movie was at the time. So I was really excited for this one, and I was disappointed.
Darn.
A little bit, yeah.
I made a note, too, that there were things that I really liked, again, as far as, like, the direction and the cinematography. But I also wrote, because I don't watch a lot of these types of movies, I don't know how cliched it is. I don't know if these are very, like, typical kind of, like, horror shots or if it was unique in the genre. So I thought the performances were really, really great. I'm a huge fan of Toni Collette and her character of Gretchen.
Hereditary this year, also amazing. Did you see that?
Nope.
Episode 2!
The trailer gave me scary dreams, so I probably am not going to see it, but...
Well, read the Wikipedia like I did,
yeah,
and then we'll talk.
There we go. But so I thought, of course, Toni Collette was great. Renee Russo as Redora was really great. Jake Gyllenhaal, Josephina. And I felt like, as far as characters go, I felt like Coco was maybe the person we were supposed to relate to the most.
This was a young intern played by Natalia Dyer, famous for...
Nancy
in Stranger Things. And she had the same kind of doe-in-the-headlights look.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like after I found the very first body, I would be like, I'm leaving the art world forever. And so she just had to, like, find everybody.
Spoiler one, she finds just about all the bodies and then moves back to Michigan. So she escapes unscathed.
Mm-hmm.
Physically. I wanted to go back to what you said about the opening music.
Yeah.
Is kind of, I would call it plucky. in that it was a little upbeat and it was also plucking of stringed instruments. And for me, that reminded me a lot of the opening for American Psycho. 2000, directed by Mary Herron. Because when that movie starts, the title credits start, there's drops of red on a white background, and you're like, okay, here we go, here's the blood already, but turns out it's like a raspberry coulis. And my thought, when I started watching those credits, it reminded me so much of that. Are we supposed to take this seriously? In the way that Patrick Bateman is an unreliable narrator of his existence. I wouldn't necessarily say we're supposed to question how people are experiencing things in this movie. I think we're supposed to question how seriously we're supposed to think Dan Gilroy was taking this. Because he wrote it and directed it.
Absolutely.
So I would like to talk a little bit more about it, and then I want to share some of the stuff that I read about that went into the making of this movie.
Sure.
That even though it doesn't make me like the movie more, it makes me appreciate what it is.
Yeah, I definitely felt like when I had heard about it, I had heard it kind of billed as a horror comedy, and I think it definitely had that kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, not only at the expense of the art world, which is ridiculous, and had a lot of kind of interesting questions about what art is and how we're supposed to interact with it, but it definitely had that sense of lightness. You know, I never really felt like the threat was serious, especially because of how it very specifically targeted the people whose actions were quote-unquote bad. You know, and that was one thing that actually didn't work for me, was the fact that in some cases, super duper spoilers, the way people died was directly related to how they criticized the art. So like Josephina was killed by having the like graffiti art, which she had ridiculed just before, like kind of consume her, which I thought was a really kind of cool sequence. I liked that sequence.
That was creepy.
And then Jake Gyllenhaal's character Morph, what a great name, was killed by Hobo Man, which I knew Hobo Man was coming back because when I first saw it, I was like, that is the creepiest thing I've ever seen.
When we first meet Hobo Man, just to give you a sense, it's this kind of an android that looks like it's built of composite parts and then was rejected in a dumpster for a long time. Like maybe it was once a bellhop at a futuristic, or a butler at a futuristic hotel, and now it's been destroyed. And I wrote down some of the three things it said. Have you ever felt invisible? Once I built a railroad, and I can't save you. That was really creepy. But about the death, this is the thing that I think Gilroy is a very skilled filmmaker, and that's obvious. I think what isn't so obvious is that he did his horror research, because there were tropes that looked like the toe was dipped into. But there was no sense of the rules of why people were killed. There was no sense of order why people were killed in what order based on their level of, I guess you would say, offensiveness.
Sure. And
the background of this art, this ventral dies.
Yes,
ventral dies. I started trying to see if that was an anagram, and I don't think it is. But I mean, I got devil out of it, so I got excited. But
there you go.
So the idea is behind the film is that this woman Josephina, it's in this very, what would you say, superficial, any way that you've seen the art world represented as mindless and venal and superficial. And there's even one scene where somebody finds a pile of trash and they bend down, they're like, this is remarkable. Right. Somebody goes, that's not art. Any cliche you've heard about that's totally represented here in this film. So it starts off, but this woman, Josephina, in her apartment building, she finds a man has died, and she goes into his apartment, and there's tons and tons of this really creepy, weird art. And she sees it as an opportunity to, make her way into the art world even further. Well, lo and behold, as these paintings, they were supposed to be destroyed, and they're not supposed to be profited off of, and if you look at them too long, then they move, and bad things start to happen.
Yeah, they're somehow possessed with...
But we never understand why.
Right, yeah, that was another thing that was hard for me, too, because they talk a little bit about Deese's trauma as a child, but it wasn't then manifested in a way that was consistent. So it was kind of like any sort of art that this person interacted with could then be inhabited with this spirit that then killed them. So it wasn't even necessarily because the sphere wasn't a piece at all, and that's what killed Gretchen. So yeah, there, and then the monkeys in the tow
gas
truck,
station.
The gas station
Yeah,
place.
painting of monkeys playing poker, was it?
Yeah, I liked the visual of it, like the camera moving and then showing it as 3D. Like I liked that kind of look, but yeah, so there was definitely inconsistency as far as the retribution that the spirit of this man was attempting to give.
That's not even to say I don't need things to be explained to me. Sometimes it's like with the monster you don't see, the reason remains unknown. You can't understand it, and I think that's something we can talk about in Russian Doll a little bit too.
That's sometimes even scarier.
Yeah, but in this context, they give you a little, including black and white photos and all this guy's bad past and he produced all this art. But, did he make a deal with the devil? Is it supernatural? At one point I was thinking, is this actually going to be a supernatural thing, or is it just these people killing each other? Right. We don't know. Mm-hmm. And because it's so inconsistent in its application, that it's just really kind of meh. Kind of blah.
Yeah, and at the very end, too, so what happens with Bryson, is that his name? There's a man
the
who
handyman
works,
with the AirPods always in.
Yeah, who works at the art gallery, crashes his truck because he's transporting these paintings, and they basically cause him to crash. And so then the paintings are not recovered when the truck is recovered. So at the very, very end of the film, you see someone who looks like they're experiencing homelessness that found this crate of paintings that is then selling them. So for a second, I was like, oh no, it's like Audrey 2, like the end of Little Shop of Horrors, where it's like, it's going to take over the whole world because now these paintings are going to be distributed.
They're still going out, yeah.
But then I was like, well, I felt like the reason that these people were dying is because, as Morph says, like, it's targeting the people who are trying to profit off the art. Mm-hmm. So then I was like, well, does that kind of mean, with Hobo Man kind of tying it together, that art is for the people? And so if somebody is experiencing homelessness and, like, needs that, that there wouldn't be that kind of curse because this person is actually using this art for their livelihood and not just for profit.
I like it. I think you give it more credit than it did.
Yeah,
I think it was just the stinger. Yeah. Oh no, the art will continue to murder.
Right, like if there was that sense of like,
there's always got to be the zing at the end that lets you know that no, the monster isn't really dead.
Yeah. So then I was like, okay, is it supposed to be about you're supposed to listen to the artist's wishes? Which to me brings up a really interesting idea of in our social media culture, when, like with the Captain America, most recent Captain America comic run, where he was shown to be an agent of Hydra, the fans just lost their minds. Was like, absolutely not. There's no way that this can be. So then I was like, well, do we listen to the artist because they are the ones that are creating this thing, but also how much does an artist and creator have a responsibility to the people they're creating the artwork for? Because Josephina at the very end says too, like, what's the point of creating art if nobody sees it? So I think for me there were some interesting, like you said, dipping toes in this other kind of commentary of like when Morph does the bad review for that guy for Josephina,
so
and
again, it was her ex-boyfriend, so she wanted him slagged off basically, and he like did slag right off into a coma. So.
Exactly, and so the way also that our negative reactions and negative words directed specifically at artists can be very harmful. So I think, like you said, there was a lot of really kind of miniature ideas that just never coalesced.
Yeah, there was some really interesting commentary, I think, especially not about murder and death, and suffering, but about art.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few of those. I wrote a few of them down. At one point, they talks to somebody who had examined the artwork. And she said,
right.
I'm glad to have been rid of them because I was unable to differentiate the working materials from personal effects. And that talks about how much of you is in the art. Now, in this case, it was literal, that was blood that was used in the paintings. And at one point, it kind of, the painting bleeds a little bit. That was neat. I liked that, too. So that was curious, I thought.
It was a very interesting and clever way of putting it.
That they can't. So that's
that she didn't just say, "Oh, he used blood."
He cut himself and used blood in that. But that idea that, I mean, think about it. Not even just in art, but in your own work,
mm-hmm.
to differentiate. How able are you to differentiate your work from yourself? And for somebody that produces something, like the writer on that Captain America issue probably thought that was going to be a great zinger, and then, as you know, the way that people tend to react. Don't ever read the comment section on anything.
Yeah.
That's always a bad idea.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting that they kept saying all art is dangerous
mm-hmm.
in that way too. Rhonda? No.
Redora.
I liked that name.
I like that name as well.
Redora had a tattoo on her
mm-hmm.
arm that said no death, no art.
Yep.
I liked that. And let's see. Oh, yes. At one point there, it's kind of a montage through an art show. And they're looking at it, and this guy goes, well, what does it say? And this gal goes, well, what do you feel? Yes. And he nods like, yeah. And I really liked that, too, because I like a lot of modern art. And a lot of people don't. They're like, well, that's just trash or something like that. Mm-hmm. But for me, like, I go up to a piece and I'm like, sometimes it speaks to me, sometimes it doesn't, and usually it's like, oh, feelings, and then I got to move to something else. So I really liked those in particular. Some other funny things, though, when they talked about the early stuff was great, but then it became self-parody. And I always thought about that, too. Yeah. What happens then to an artist that becomes successful? And you see that through the character played by John Malkovich, who was very successful. And now
Piers?
mostly, Piers. And then
not Pierce. Piers.
Yeah, like Piers Morgan. Also, don't read anything he writes. But yeah, so the most of his career was turning into running a shop, replicating his earlier artworks. And the only stuff that was upstairs was a painting that nobody was crazy about and a pile of garbage that somebody thought was art and wasn't.
Absolutely. I think all of these elements did make it, what am I trying to say? All of these elements were present, and again, I just felt like there was something missing, some cohesion. There were so many great, like, one-liners. I think Morph at one point says, we peddle perception. No, Redora says that mm-hmm. when she's trying to sell these paintings, because again, if enough people say that something is good, does that make it good? Do I then go and say, well, look how great this is because this famous person said it was great, when you may come in and be like, that is a turd. That is a literal turd on a pedestal.
That's not art.
Yeah, so that I thought was really interesting too.
Gretchen, Toni Collette, she is alone in a gallery with this item called a sphere. Mm-hmm. And you're supposed to place, your arm inside of it, and you're going to have some sort of sensation. And you can probably guess what happens. It chops her arm off and blood everywhere. That was actually a really cool scene. I liked that. I thought that was really good. Yeah, it was spraying, but the lighting underneath the sphere was white, but it mm-hmm. transitioned to a reddish pink. That was cool. Yeah. But then the scene that followed was pretty much hilarious because Josephine is on the phone telling Redora about what happened, and that nobody understood that was not part of the exhibit. Mm-hmm. So that they opened it up and people were going in and they were really into it, and these little kids were stomping around in the blood, tracking it all over, and then Coco comes in and screams her head off again. And that's how they discover it. It's like so hilarious, but also at the same time, of course that would happen in this world. So I feel like that is the point, not, oh, whoa, why is this sphere like chopping arms off? What is happening? This is what we're supposed to look at. So as a horror aficionado, not so satisfying, but as somebody that likes to think about other stuff, like weirdness of perception.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when they first introduced the idea of the sphere and that idea of the interactability of art, because there's this sense that in Western culture, I don't know much about global kind of art culture, but in Western art culture, there's this sense that you don't touch. You look, but you don't touch. Mm-hmm. So even when I've gone to museums that have these exhibits that say, please touch this, please interact with this, it's very uncomfortable, and many people don't, because we have this sense of like, but no, somebody created that, and I don't want to mess up their vision. And so absolutely, when Gretchen dies and her body is still there, you know, people are like, oh, this is just part of this thing, and are still interacting with this piece. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Like, I don't know if I saw that, especially because it was like kind of up on that pedestal. To me, anything like on a pedestal, I associate with like a big sign that says like, do not ride this horse statue and stuff like that. So
keep away.
Yeah. So that's always kind of interesting as well.
Absolutely. So are we to take this seriously?
I don't think so. I think it's an exploration of what the genre is more than it is in the genre.
I think it is a horror-tinged, creepy momented commentary on art. And I think that, now I'll reveal the little research that I did about the background to this one. Dan Gilroy, for a year and a half, had worked on a film, it was Superman something. It was going to be a big budget film. And after the success of Nightcrawler, people were really excited about it, and he worked on it for a year and a half, and the studio said, never mind.
Oh.
So then I was like, a year and a half of pulling full bore your artistic vision into something that was going to have a lot of resources to manifest that vision. And then these people, these muckety-mucks, say, never mind. And that this project grew out of that. So when you see, I mean, we're left to speculate about Vetrel Deese's, we know of his past, but why did he need to manifest his violence in art? We don't know. But I think when we know that Gilroy was professionally disappointed, and that Buzzsaw, Velvet Buzzsaw, came out of that disappointment, or at least was influenced by it, that helps me appreciate the film a lot better.
Yeah,
and it's just like, what kind of movie is this? I don't know, but
yeah, that's a really interesting insight. Thank you so much. So why don't we transition to talking about Russian Doll?
Yeah.
Since Russian Doll is also, I wouldn't really categorize as horror, which is how I had heard about it. I would say episode 7 is the closest it gets.
Yes.
And so, again, there will be so many spoilers. So please go watch it. It's really, really good.
It's 8 episodes. They're under half an hour each. It's easy to get through in that way, so do it.
Yeah. So what did you think? What was your first impression?
Not crazy about it. Not because it wasn't sufficiently horror enough, but just, let me preface it by saying it's because of me. And I forgot one great line from Velvet Buzzsaw, what Morph says. He says, critique is so limiting and emotionally draining. So we'll try to limit the drain here, but I lived for 10 years in New Jersey, which is very close to New York City, and watch a lot of TV and movies, and I'm really, really over this idea that New York is the place where things happen, and all the that typical trope about artisans and, you know, all this stuff. So when it was plugged into that again, I was not happy about it. And kind of like the way that LA, the worst side of LA, was shown in Velvet Buzzsaw. Kind of like the most predictable, tropey, well, dull as dishwater to me, tropes about New York were also on display in Russian Doll. So it was not really very, that was hard for me to get through. The first episodes to get through they were really difficult for me.
Okay.
And then it really picked up
perspective.
Yeah, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Those last episodes, they were really good. And that's because it got a little bit creepier and less la boheme.
Yeah, I think for sure the first, 3 or 4 episodes are definitely funnier. They're definitely more facetious. I think kind of the idea of that kind of lifestyle. I really liked that juxtaposition, wow, that was hard to say, between that kind of ridiculousness in the first part of the show and then how devastating it gets later on. I think
the payoff is worth it.
Absolutely.
It nails it. Even for someone like me that really didn't like it, was like, I gotta get through this. But I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It made it worth it, for sure.
I'm glad. I really like Natasha Lyonne plays Nadia. I've always been a huge fan of her ever since probably, but I'm a cheerleader.
Yeah.
It's probably my first real foray into her work.
Me too.
I really liked how coarse and savvy she was and how she was kind of an asshole, but that I was invested in what was going on with her.
She has charm, even though, as people tell her, she's the most selfish person that they know.
Yeah. I also really liked that idea that she kind of gets into this sense. I guess we should do just a really quick overview of what this is. So Russian Doll is about a woman who, I know, since we're spoiling it, we are assuming that you've seen it, but...
Or read the Wikipedia like I do.
Yeah. So it's about this woman who is celebrating her 36th birthday.
But sounds like she's 72.
Yeah. And she is going throughout her party and trying to find her missing cat.
Oatmeal.
And I love that name. And she ends up dying and then waking back up in the same
bathroom.
place, same time, and has to basically... I wouldn't even say relive, but she's experiencing this loop of dying over and over in different ways. I like that there wasn't this idea of the death we know is later linked to Alan.
Another man who's caught in a time
Caught in this loop of deaths, but I like that the deaths weren't consistent. It wasn't like, oh, we know when it's going to happen, and it's not always going to happen in the same way. But I really liked how she attempted to change the outcome in a certain way because she thought that this was happening because of certain actions of hers. So through each loop, she was trying to rectify those actions, like with her ex-boyfriend? Were they married? I can't remember.
Never
if they were
married, no kids.
Right.
Lots of fibroids.
Right. With her ex-boyfriend and the way she treats people, but that isn't what ends up actually
even that
being important.
That idea that, I need to correct something came a lot later.
Right.
I wanted to share, I love science fiction. Big fan of the Twilight Zone, so right away I knew that I'd be into this as a concept because it's this thing called a time loop.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, time loop as a trope has two different forms. The one is that the time loop is some kind of puzzle, that things change, and that by things changing, you attempt to figure out how to break out of that time loop. The other is that things will never change, and that you're imprisoned in that loop forever. And so I was reading a little bit about time loops, and of course, when you think about reliving over and over, we're, like a week away from Groundhog Day.
Right.
So, of course, the 1993 movie with Bill Murray, we're going to think of that one.
I did watch this on Groundhog Day for that reason.
Perfect. There's also just 2 years ago, Happy Death Day was another time loop one. I didn't see that one because at that point I saw it in the theater 15 times, so I was busy.
And that's getting a sequel.
Yes.
Happy Death Day.
Yes, to you. Very cute.
Yes.
And then another one that I read about that actually was nominated for an Academy Award. It was a short film called 12:01 p.m. in 1990. It starred Kurtwood Smith as a man who's caught in a time loop. And it's the permanent time loop, the one that's fixed. And spoiler for that one, it ends with him knowing that nothing he could do to be, murder or suicide will ever get him out of that. So, is it purgatorial? Is it damnation? We're not very sure. But so time loops are really, really interesting. And I think when you couple the time loop with the idea of the Russian doll, what do you think of that? That I wrote it down so I could pronounce it correctly. The Matryoshka doll. Those nesting Russian dolls. The outer layer, usually a woman, and the inner layer, traditionally solid wood, a baby. And just a little trivia, the largest one ever was created in, what was it? the 2000s, 51 pieces.
Oh, yeah.
So why call it Russian doll? I'm always interested in why they call things what they call them. So that idea that not just a loop, but the fact that nesting, to going down, we have to get at something inside may be the key to breaking out of the loop.
Which brings us to episode 7, which was so amazing, I thought. I really appreciated this idea of having to kill something within yourself that is preventing you from moving on.
Explain for what that meant.
So
it's quite interesting. I'll start you off and then you jump in.
Okay.
So Nadia's deciding that she needs to do things a little differently. She needs to not be so selfish, it seems like. And one of the things that she wants to do to make amends is this ex-boyfriend, John, who their interactions at, I guess it was a synagogue, were hilarious.
Yes.
Hilarious. But she and he got together while he was married, broke up their marriage. She was supposed to meet his daughter, and she chickened out, and he's all really devastated by all this. So she decides that she's going to meet this girl, Lucy. She's going to bring her a book, not as a present, but as something that we share. So she goes to meet the daughter, and she's speaking with her. And
so throughout this episode, Nadia starts seeing visions of herself as a child. I will say that for a while, I thought that Ruth was her mother, like the way that she talked to her and about her.
Who's also a psychiatrist.
I thought was Nadia's mother, and that they just had this very interesting relationship. So then when Nadia kept talking about her relationship with her mother and how fraught it was, episode 7 starts giving us these flashbacks of what it was actually like as a child to be with her mother, who was experiencing some sort of eating disorder, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of sort of mental instability that Ruth, as the psychiatrist, was very adamant. She said several times in this whole show, we don't say the word crazy in this house, which I really appreciated too. This being a female-centric story written by women, directed by a lot of women. So many women get called crazy all the time for things that aren't. That I really appreciated that kind of aspect to it.
Let me piggyback on that, because I love too that throughout the whole thing, as she's experiencing these time loops, she never thinks, "Oh, I'm going crazy." She never says that.
She thinks
says,
it's
the universe
drugs.
is fucking with me, and I will not engage. This is the game. I'm Michael Douglas. Never once, "Oh God, I'm losing my mind." Not once does one of the deaths come because she hangs herself or ODs or stays in her apartment and starves to death. It's never. She's always trying to fight it.
Yes.
No, never once questioning her sanity.
Yeah, and so seeing this relationship with her mother that caused her to basically feel this disquiet and this sense of worthlessness, I think, in herself, that was so buried, that was so nested within all of these other layers of her being a successful game designer, which I loved. Having these relationships with a lot of different people that clearly people tolerated her presence and were friends with her, but like they said, she was very selfish. So she starts seeing visions of herself as this child, and that's where it got kind of creepy, where it started to get camera angles and the ways that she was trying to figure out why she was seeing herself. So then when she goes and decides to go finally talk to the daughter, Lucy, it devolves into this sense of, when are you going to let go? Why are you stuck in this thing that you've been carrying with you for so long? And for somebody that has gone through therapy continually and is constantly working on being better and constantly figuring out why I make certain choices or why I feel a certain way in reaction to certain things, I really, really appreciated that her understanding of this time loop was related to something deeper than just the way she interacts with other people and the selfish ways she did that.
Yeah, it was something like the Matryoshka dolls inside that she had to let go of, for sure.
I definitely think a second viewing will give me more insight into that. I think I was kind of consumed so much with like wanting to conclude it and like figure out what was gonna happen that I think
did read that they think they'll get like 3 seasons out of this.
Awesome.
Yeah, again, like Velvet Buzzsaw, spoiler here, we don't know why Alan and Nadia are stuck in the time loops.
Right.
We have no idea why, and we don't actually know if they're successful. The end scene is really remarkable.
Yes.
We don't know what has happened at the end of they figured something out.
Right.
But what does that mean? But that's another reason why I loved episode 7 so much. Not only did it get a little darker in that way, but up to that point, I feel like we all, including the audience, possibly, speaking for myself, but also Nadia and Alan, got comfortable in the predictability of the time loops.
Absolutely.
But as episode 7 progresses, you start to notice they're noticing like bowls of fruit that people would have on their tables or at the local deli where they visit Ferran and where Oatmeal lives part-time, that the fruit is rotting. And as the loops progress, they notice things start disappearing. And that brought a real sense of disquiet because now the rules were changing.
Yes.
And we don't know why. And I got the sense that we're in a time loop, but time is running out.
Right.
It's like spinning a top. It'll spin for a while. We'll have a few time loops, but whatever kinetic and potential energy is in those loops is running out. What does that mean? That they think because they haven't figured out how to stop them? Or is it just the inherent nature of this particular time loop that you
That
spin
it's
in
finite.
it and that you try to do all these things and then it's over? So at the end of episode 8, I don't know what it means, but that I can't say enough about how much I liked episode 7 particularly in that way that it started to get scarier.
Yes.
I mean, not like dying 15 times and not understanding why would be scary enough, but that the rules were changing and that things disappearing. It was frightening. It was really frightening.
Yeah, and I really liked episode 8, partly because after episode 7, in which the rules changed and you didn't know what to expect, all of a sudden, like you said, I think we do get this sense of complacency. We're like, okay, well, she's going to loop, but she's going to wake up in the same place and the same time, and it's going to be fine. She just has to figure it out. But then things start changing and disappearing and molding. And by episode 8, after I'd seen episode 7, I was like, something is going to happen. I was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And what was so clever about it was I discovered what was going on, I think like half a second before it was revealed.
Yeah.
Because you really get this sense of unease as things are progressing. You have this sense, you're like, this loop is different. There is something not right about this. And then that moment when you realize they're not in the same place, I was like,
the loops have not intersected.
No.
Yep.
And I thought that was so clever and so well designed, even just in the way that the screen then showed like the different places. Oh, I really, really liked it.
And then the way at the very end it came
merged
back together again. Yeah, that was brilliant. So as much as I struggled with those first episodes, the payoff in 7 and 8 were so totally worth it in that way. And I mean, like I said at the start, like I don't like feeling good. And these episodes, man, they really make you feel bad. Yeah. Not in the way like I feel sad, but just like when you don't understand what's happening, or when maybe if you have like a cold and your balance is off.
Yeah.
It's that kind of queasiness and the real fear that they expressed in those episodes. The first, when things were disappearing, and then in episode 8, when they both realized that their loops are not intersected. There was more dread in those times than at the start of the loop. At the start, it was played for laughs, basically, right?
Yeah.
How can you get... I get electrocuted here now, and I fall down the stairs like 19 different ways. It was funny, but then it took the turn.
Yeah, and I really liked the way that they explored Alan and Nadia's relationship. I thought that Alan, played by Charlie Bennett, was kind of the perfect foil for Nadia's character. He's very upright. She comments on his posture.
Yeah.
And kind of uptight. He's very... his apartment is very organized and very clean, but then we also see him after his breakup with his girlfriend, consuming all this cake and
I have stuff to say about
feeling very messy. But I really liked how when they first discovered each other and first kind of started on this journey of like, let's try and figure this out together, it wasn't romantic. They have sex in one of the loops, but it doesn't feel...
Well, kinda.
Yeah, like, sort of.
Yeah. He's very drunk, so I don't know.
But it doesn't feel like then when episode 8 comes along and they realize they're in 2 different loops, they still are somehow connected, and they have established this connection in this relationship where they're like, we have to help each other even though you're not the person I've been helping. So I really liked that. I liked that it was, not this need for Nadia to like find this person and then find understanding, and then it was a romance. Yeah, like it was just a very really interesting and dynamic relationship where they call each other out on stuff, and they are not compatible, but they're very both invested in helping each other. Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
But it works that way.
Yeah, so talk about Alan a little bit.
Well, first of all, my big bugaboo about his girlfriend, Beatrice. She is completing a PhD in literature, which Nadia says is useless. I disagree. But you're working on your dissertation, you live in an apartment like that in New York City. Listen, I'm plugged in to the science fiction element, fantasy element of the time loop, but that made me insane. I was like, no, I hate that. I hate this. Yeah. I think I grumped for like 2 seconds because I've been working on a dissertation for a long time, and it's, no, you don't live like that. You sure don't. Okay, that was all I needed to say. I really hated that, though.
I loved the scene where Nadia comes with Alan for the breakup.
Yeah.
And it's just like sitting there just like eating chips. And
those
like,
crackers are good too.
Yeah.
They're gluten-free. I've tried them. They're not bad.
Nice. But yeah, where she's like, I'm here for you and I'm going to like see what's going on to see if we can suss out what's going on with your loops. And it was just great. She's just got this great energy, Natasha Lyonne does, that she brings to this character with the very curly hair and the gruff voice. And
the smoker's voice.
And the posture, the like
for
hunched
someone
over.
that lives in that area too, that idea that they speak about her Jewish ancestry, even though she doesn't practice, like her mannerisms are very consistent with that. My favorite line reading that she had is when Alan's like, "Wow, you're a really smart person." She goes, "Hey, thanks for finally noticing." And that was great. Yeah, I really liked that. Yeah.
So what was your reaction to the character of Horse, the homeless man? Because I originally thought, I had heard before I started watching it that she met somebody else who was also looping, and I thought it would be him. Yeah. Like when she first met him.
Yeah, the way that he spoke in the tropey way, the person who has experiencing homelessness is crazy and sees things. Which is always a little bit annoying to me, because it's a trope. These are real people with real issues that we can do something about, and we don't. That's another discussion, different podcast altogether. So initially I thought, but of course the way my mind works is like, oh, he's a murderer too.
Oh.
But no, she develops a tenderness towards him. One point when she's failed at certain tasks that she set herself in this loop. She's wandering around drunk looking for the cat. She meets Horse and they speak, and she allows him to cut her hair, and the death in that loop is that she freezes to death next with him. And then later she goes to the homeless shelter where he's at.
Because he said somebody stole his shoes.
And so he wasn't going to go back, and she prevented his shoes from being stolen. And then later she returns the shoes. She takes Alan's shoes to him. But my favorite interaction between them, and I felt like he was a catalyst in a few ways, maybe for her not to like, oh, I need to be nice to people that need help, and that way I'll break free of this. It wasn't like that, and I'm glad it didn't turn out like that, because that's dull. It's been done. But the fact they were speaking, and Nadia wears, what did they call it? The Krugerrand, which is a South African gold bullion. It was a coin. Nadia wears one around her neck. She later reveals to Alan that her mother was gifted 150 of these coins from her Holocaust surviving grandparents, and that her mother ended up spending all of them save one. And in fact, the exact monetary amount is the way that the two loops finally intersect again, in that way that she can get in touch. But it's a gold coin, and she gives it to him. She gives it to Horst. And he says, "Is that gold?" She's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Why don't you want it?" She says, "It's too heavy." And that was great. And I think the way that he looked at her, he understood it, because he was talking about how having stuff doesn't make you a person, and that it weighs you down.
Yeah, and that ties in perfectly. Does she have that interaction in episode 7? Or does it come after? Is it in episode 8? I feel like it's one of the very last things. One of the last interactions she has with him.
I don't have it in my notes, so I would say either 6 or 7.
Okay.
Things started to get heavy in 6 when they're noticing dead fruit and flowers.
Right.
So it might have been there.
Yeah, because that too is so perfectly symbolic of her relationship with her mother and the stuff that she confronts in episode 7, this heaviness that is preventing her from moving on. I really loved it. I think I first started watching it, and I really enjoyed the what is the word I'm trying to think of?
I'm not
the convention.
Oh, I guess we're not sharing a loop. I can't.
No. The idea of it and how it was manifested, but yeah, I think it really got to a very important place, and I think it ended up feeling much more significant than it initially turned out to be.
Because it's co-produced by Amy Poehler. So the funny stuff is very funny. It's very funny. And I thought that's all it would be. I like funny stuff, sure, but remember, I don't like to feel. So it was like a ha-ha time loop. Any time loop stuff that I've seen, even like Groundhog Day, gets pretty dark. So when it started off, I was, I don't know. And the payoff, even when we started our conversation, I was like, I'm not crazy about it. And the more that we talked about it, got through all this, and like, no, I really liked it. So, but my concern is season 2 and season 3. The episode started like up here, I'm pointing up high, and now I'm moving my finger down, because it got heavier, it got darker, it got more frightening. We're gonna have funny ha-ha times, and then are we gonna do a cycle of peaks and valleys for season 2 or 3? Are we gonna start darker and keep? I don't know if you can keep going dark with somebody like Natasha Lyonne and Amy Poehler and those types of people, because the comedy is really good and it works. So I'm afraid that it'll be inconsistent, and that when the season starts and we're back to hijinks, I'll be a little disappointed. Because I'm really plugged into 6, 7, and 8, and how serious and cathartic it started to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there are other people that they will find that are also experiencing the same sort of thing, or do you think that it'll remain focused on Nadia and Alan?
I don't know. That's always the problem. I can't think of an example right now. Maybe some other people can. Leave one in the comments. And I won't read it, no. But, when a show is successful and it has a dynamic relationship between people, but, you need to move the story forward, so you introduce another element. What was his name? Cousin Oliver, Brady Bunch. When everyone got too old, they needed a little kid again, and everyone hated that poor little redheaded guy. Yeah. So was he redheaded? See, I can't remember. Sorry,
Wesley
Cousin Oliver
from Star Trek Next Generation.
Yeah, so that's my fear, is like, I bet they will. They'll meet other people looping, and maybe some people will loop out, and they'll understand how it works then. But I'm only projecting that in that way because I've seen similar things like that. My hope is that they find something different to do, like they did in episodes 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I am excited to see more of
Yeah.
that.
You have to wait.
Yeah. Well, we've been chatting about this for an hour.
We have.
I hope you have all enjoyed listening and
We sure
hearing
did.
our take on Russian Doll and Velvet Buzzsaw. It sounds like we're both kind of... Velvet Buzzsaw, I think, is worth watching.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But,
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, there's definitely... it's not like a typical horror film.
Just manage your expectations better than I do, apparently.
Yeah, and then Russian Doll, I loved absolutely and wholly, including the beginning episodes. But if you're having a hard time getting into it, stick
Hang
with
on,
it. Yeah,
hang on.
it will definitely be
The
worth it.
payoff is definitely worth it, for sure.
All right, well, you can find this very new podcast called Unlike Any Other.
Pardon me.
I was going to say it wrong
Unlike
anyway.
any known colors.
Unlike Any Known Colors on thefeminerdfiles.net. You can also find us on Spotify, Podbean, and iTunes.